One of Kingsley's letters from this period may show the way things were tending, and certainly makes me remember the atmosphere as it then was. He is writing Robert Conquest on 7th of April 1977. The swing to the right here is putting the wind up the lefties. At the Friday lunch the other day, they, chiefly Hitchens and Fenton, were saying that chaps were getting fed up about stuff that may not be Labour's fault, but is associated with them rather than the Tories. Porn and permissiveness generally, comprehensivization, TUC bosses, terrorism, and the defense rundown. In cultural political terms, that's much as I remember it myself. An expiring post-war labor consensus, increasingly dependent upon tax-funded statism, yet actually run by the union-based, old-line, right wing of the Labour Party machine. A Weimar without the sex, as I once tried to phrase it at the time, except that in the rest of society there was sex aplenty, with the hedonism of the 60s almost officially instated as dogma, and the slow, surreptitious growth of this consensus to the then unguessed at status of correctness. There could have been no bad time to meet him, but this, in retrospect, seems to have been the perfect moment to become acquainted with Ian McEwan. It was Martin who brought us together, Ian having succeeded him as the winner of the Somerset Maugham Award. By then, everyone had been mesmerized by Ian's early collections of short stories, First Love, Last Rites, and In Between the Sheets. Met in person, he seemed at first to possess some of the same vaguely unsettling qualities as his tales. He never raised his voice, surveyed the world in a very level and almost effectless fashion through moon-shaped granny glasses, wore his hair in a fringe, was rail thin, showed an interest in what Martin used to call hippie-ish pursuits, and when I met him, was choosing to live on the fringes of then weed-infested frontline black ghetto in Brixton. What he wrote you could see, as Clive James put it, when using Ian's character in a novel, and when it came to fiction, he seemed to have contact with other remote spheres. He could, and still can, for example, write about childhood and youth with an almost eerie ability to think and feel his way back into it, a faculty that many superb writers are unable to recruit in themselves. I was sitting at my New Statesman desk one afternoon when the telephone rang, and a strange voice asked for me by name. After I had confirmed that it was indeed me, or I, the voice said, "This is Thomas Pynchon speaking. I am glad they did not say what I first thought of. that I did not say what I first thought of saying, because he was soon enough able to demonstrate that it was him, and that a mutual friend, make that a common friend, named Ian McEwan, had suggested that he call." The book of still another friend, Larry Kramer's ultra-homosexual effort, Faggots, had been seized by the British Customs and Excise, and all the impounded copies were in danger of being destroyed. Mr. Pynchon was somewhere in England, and was mightily distressed by this. What could be done? Could I raise an outcry, as Pynchon had been assured by Ian I could? I told him that one could protest hoarsely and long, but that Britain had no law protecting free speech or forbidding state censorship. We chatted a bit longer. I artlessly offered to call him back. He laughingly declined his transparent try-on and faded back into the world where only McEwan could find him. Ian seemed to be able to manage this sort of thing without ever boasting of it. He also formed a friendship with the almost impossible to find Milan Kundera. From this you may surmise that Ian was not part of any pronounced drift to the political or cultural right. But nor was he someone who had stopped reflecting at approximately the time of Woodstock. His father had been a regular officer in a Scottish regiment. He had a serious working knowledge of military history. His love of the natural world and of wildlife, leading to the arduously contemplative hikes about which we teased him, was matched by an interest in the hard sciences. I think that he did, at one stage in his life, dabble a bit in what's loosely called the New Age, but in the end it was the rigorous side that won out, and his novels are almost always patrolling some difficult frontier between the speculative and the unseen, and the ways in which material reality reimposes itself. When not talking with penetration about literature and music, he was in himself an acute register of the stresses, cultural and moral, that were remarking the old British political divide. One day, or actually night, I made another saunter across the bridge of that divide in order to test the temperature and conditions on the other side. The circumstances could hardly have been more propitious for me. The Tories were having a reception in the Rosebery Room of the House of Lords in order to launch a crusty old book by a crusty old peer named Lord Butler. And there was a rumor that the newly elected female leader of the Conservative Party would be among those present for the cocktails. I had written a longish article for the New York Times Magazine, saying in effect that if Labour could not revolutionize British society, then the task might well fall to the right. I had also written a shorter piece of the New Statesman, reporting from the Conservative Party conference and saying in passing that I thought Miss Thatcher was surprisingly sexy. To this day, I have never had so much anger mail saying, in effect, "How could you?" I felt immune to Miss Thatcher in most other ways, since, for all of her glib free market advocacy on one front, she seemed to be an emotional ally of the authoritarian and protectionist white settler regime in Rhodesia. And it was this very thing that afforded me the opportunity to grapple with her so early in her career. At the party was Sir Peregrine Worsthorde, a poised and engaged chap with whom I'd had many debates in Rhodesia itself, both at the celebrated colonial bar of the Meikles Hotel and in other more rugged locations. I'd even taken him to meet Sir Roy Welensky, the tough old right-wing white trade unionist and former Prime Minister of Rhodesia who had broken with the treasonous pro-apartheid riffraff around Ian Smith. It's always seemed perfectly simple to me, Mr. Worsthorde, this old bulldog growled in the unmistakable accent of the region. If you don't like Blick men, then don't live in Africa. Perry had granted the justice of this, as how could he not, and now felt that he owed me a small service in return. Care to meet the new leader? Who could refuse? With moments, Margaret Thatcher and I were face to face. With moments, too, I had turned away and was showing her my buttocks. I suppose that I must give some sort of explanation for this. Almost as soon as we shook hands on immediate introduction, I felt that she knew my name and had perhaps connected it to the Socialist Weekly that had recently called her rather sexy. While she struggled adorably in this moment of pretty confusion, I felt obliged to seek controversy and picked a fight with her on a detail of Rhodesia-Zimbabwe policy. She took me up on it. I was, as it chances, right on the small point of fact, and she was wrong. But she maintained her wrongness with such adamant strength that I eventually conceded the point and even bowed slightly to emphasize my acknowledgement. "No," she said, "bow lower." Smiling agreeably, I bent forward a bit further. "No, no," she trilled, "much lower." By this time, a little group of interested bystanders was gathering. I again bent forward, this time much more self-consciously. Stepping around behind me, she unmasked her batteries and smote me on the rear with the parliamentary order paper that she had been rolling into a cylinder behind her back. I regained the vertical with some awkwardness. As she walked away, she looked back over her shoulder and gave an almost imperceptibly slight roll of the hip while mouthing the words, "Naughty boy." I had have eyewitnesses to this. At the time, though, I hardly believed it myself. It is only from a later perspective, looking back on the manner in which she slaughtered and cowed all the former male leadership of her party and replaced them with pliant tools, that I appreciate the premonitory glimpse of what someone in another context once called the smack of firm government that I had been afforded. Even at the time, as I left the party, I knew I had met someone rather impressive, and the worst of Thatcherism, as I was beginning by degrees to discover, was the rodent slowly stirring in my viscera, the uneasy but unbanishable feeling that on some essential matters she might be right.